What if we told you that 25 actresses from Hollywood's golden age, stars who lit up screens before man walked on the moon, are still alive today? Not myths, not memories, real women, still breathing, still witnessing the century they helped define. This isn't nostalgia, it's time travel in reverse. Because sometimes the past doesn't fade, it waits. And these women, they're still here, quietly defying time like a forgotten reel spinning in the dark. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button. It helps keep these stories alive, just like the legends we're about to meet. And let us know in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it right now? Morning coffee, midnight scroll, somewhere in between? We're about to cross decades. Might as well start by syncing our clocks. 1. Eva Marie, Saint. There is a peculiar stillness in reaching 101, not the kind that comes with fading. No, this is the stillness of having outlasted nearly everyone who once had lines in your script. Eva Marie. Saint knows that silence. She knew it when the applause died down after On the Waterfront, and again when the wind pressed her against Cary Grant on Mount Rushmore. She's the last leading lady standing from a time when Hollywood didn't need algorithms. It had grace, shadows, and women like her. Born before the invention of the chocolate chip cookie, Saint walks through history not as a relic, but as a witness. Her performances were never loud, but they lingered, much like the actress herself. She didn't burn out, she just stayed. And the industry, ever hungry for reinvention, somehow forgot to replace her. They still ask her what it was like to act with Brando, to be Hitchcock's muse without becoming his prisoner, to survive Hollywood without surrendering to it. Her answers are always too elegant, too brief. She seems to understand that the power of the past is that it doesn't explain itself. And perhaps that's the real mystery, how Eva Marie Saint, soft-spoken, understated, allergic to scandal, ended up the final boss of old Hollywood, 101 years old and somehow sharper than the scripts being written today. But if you think she's the last of her kind, you're in for a strange twist, because someone older than her is still around, and she danced with shadows before color was even a standard. 2. Karen Marsh Dahl. The Wizard of Oz has been analyzed, parodied, color-corrected, memified, and yet, tucked inside its Technicolor fantasy, is a woman who never actually said a line. Karen Marsh Dahl wasn't Dorothy, but she was Dorothy's shadow, Judy Garland's stand-in, frame by frame, light by light. And somehow, in 2025, at the age of 106, she's still here, like a forgotten reel spinning in a locked vault, unspooling quietly in the dark. Long before Judy followed the yellow brick road, Karen rehearsed it for her. She walked the sets, hit the marks, tested the lighting. She became the ghost Judy would inhabit. And when the cameras rolled, she vanished. There's something eerily poetic about surviving the movie you were barely in and outliving its star by more than half a century. Garland was immortalized in tragedy. Karen? In obscurity. And yet, she dances still, giving interviews from time to time, her voice bright, her memory crystalline. She has become a backstage oracle, one of the last people on Earth who can tell you what it smelled like inside the Emerald City. Hollywood didn't notice her at the time, but now, ironically, she's among the last links to its mythic prime, and the fact that she never made it by industry standards only makes her survival feel like a quiet rebellion. But don't get too comfortable in nostalgia just yet, because the next woman on this list actually solved murders on screen and then disappeared from view like a plot twist no one wrote an ending for. 2 legends down, 23 to go, and each one stranger, quieter, and more impossible than the last. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's still coming. And tell us in the comments, where in the world are you tuning in from? And what time is it there? We're tracing a century through voices that haven't gone silent. Might as well see what hour they're echoing into. 3. Jacqueline White. Jacqueline White had a face built for noir, sharp as a light slash through Venetian blinds, with eyes that seemed to know the ending before you did. In films like Crossfire and The Narrow Margin, she played women you underestimated, until it was too late. And maybe that's the best way to describe her entire career. Underestimated, brief, and unforgettable. She vanished from the screen in the early 1950s, not with scandal or fanfare, but with a soft goodbye and a new life waiting off camera. Hollywood is a machine built to erase you the moment you walk away. And yet Jacqueline White is still here in 2025, over a century old, with a filmography short enough to fit on a single-page resume, and yet dense enough to still echo in retrospectives and midnight movie marathons. She was the woman you didn't see coming, not in the plot and not in real life either. She gave up the game before it devoured her, then lived long enough to see the culture loop back and call her a legend. A footnote turned headliner, 70 years late. There's something quietly thrilling about her survival. She didn't just outlive her co-stars. She outlived the very industry that once wrote her off as a type. And now she stands, largely unknown but still unerased, like a film negative nobody ever developed. Until now. But while Jacqueline stepped away early, the next woman refused to slow down, and ended up recording history both on screen and behind the mic. And 4. Peggy Webber. If you've ever heard the sound of a mystery without realizing it, there's a chance Peggy Webber was behind it. A fixture of radio drama, film noir, and early television, she became one of those rare performers who could vanish completely into her characters. And yet, in 2025, she herself remains impossible to fade. Born in 1925 and still listed among the living this year, Webber is perhaps most famous for being unknown. Not in the sense of obscurity, but in the way that true actors disappear into their roles so completely that their face becomes a mood, not a memory. In Hitchcock's The Wrong Man, she played fear with such restraint it practically oozed off the celluloid. In radio, her voice adapted so fluidly across hundreds of roles that she was often mistaken for a dozen different actresses, sometimes in the same episode. Hollywood didn't always reward that kind of range, but history did. Webber also helped create, write, and produce some of her own material, a rarity in a time when actresses were expected to smile, stand still, and speak only when spoken to. She defied that mold quietly, persistently, with craft. And while she didn't become a household name, she became something stranger, a spectral presence in American storytelling, too versatile to pin down. But for someone so elusive, she's oddly not alone in the archives. Because just a few miles down the film reel, another name flickers. A woman who made cowboys nervous, danced through danger, and somehow never left the screen entirely. 5. Donna Martell. Donna Martell rode into the frame like she meant business, which is saying something, considering she spent most of her career in B-movie westerns, where the horses got more close-ups than the women. But even under all that desert dust and studio indifference, she stood out. There was a quiet command in her performances, the kind of presence that didn't beg for your attention. It simply assumed it. Born in 1927, Martell worked steadily through the 40s and 50s, gracing films like Apache Rose and Kim, where she more often than not played the love interest, the helper, the woman on the edge of the action. But look a little closer, and you'll notice something strange. Even when the story tried to sideline her, Donna had a way of seizing the center. There's a flicker of defiance behind the smile, a subtle challenge in the way she carries herself. She wasn't just there to support the hero, She looked like she might outride him if the camera tilted slightly left. And now in 2025, she's still with us, 98 years old and still holding her own in the final act of an era that tried to relegate women like her to the background. She's become a living contradiction. A woman remembered for playing second fiddle, but who now stands among the last remaining headliners. And just when you think that's rare, wait until you meet the next actress, one who starred opposite Jimmy Stewart and then walked away before anyone could tell her what else she was supposed to be. 6. Peggy Dow. Peggy Dow's career burned fast and bright, the kind of trajectory Hollywood doesn't quite know what to do with. In the early 1950s, she appeared in a handful of films, made a startling impression in Harvey as the kind-hearted nurse. And then, she left. Not in disgrace, not in defeat. She just quietly excused herself from the room. That's the twist. Dow wasn't discarded by the industry. She discarded it. She married, retired, and turned her attention to philanthropy, education, and a life of purpose far beyond the screen. And somehow, that decision feels more radical today than it ever did then. In an ecosystem built on desperate clinging, she let go. Born in 1928, she's now 97 years old. Still dignified, still vivid in memory for the relatively few films she made, and still cited in interviews as one of the great what-if careers of the golden age. But maybe the real mystery isn't what she could have become. It's why her brief time on screen continues to resonate so deeply. There's something disarming in her simplicity. She didn't need to be a legend to make you feel something. She just needed a few minutes of screen time and a heartbeat of honesty. And if you think walking away from Hollywood makes you forgotten, think again. Because the woman coming up next played opposite William Holden, kissed him like she meant it, and has been telling that story, with a glint in her eye, well into her late 90s. 7. Nancy Olson. If memory had a face, it might look something like Nancy Olson's. Warm, elegant, slightly amused. Like she knows exactly what you're about to say, and already has the more interesting version of it. But don't let the soft tone fool you. In 1950, Olson stepped into Sunset Boulevard and played opposite William Holden, like she had nothing to prove. And perhaps she didn't. She was just 22 when she earned an Oscar nomination for a film that dissected Hollywood's rotting glamour, while she herself was still being fitted for its spotlight. Olson's character in Sunset was written to be the future. Young, hopeful, almost painfully sincere. Ironically, Nancy Olson outlived not just the characters, but the cynicism that tried to bury that kind of sincerity in the decades that followed. She stayed in the game through the 50s and 60s, then shifted into a quieter role, as wife, mother, philanthropist, and occasional voice from the past, when journalists remembered to ask. And she remembers everything. In interviews as recent as 2025, at age 97, she still talks about Holden with a glimmer of youthful mischief. She tells stories not like someone clinging to the past, but like someone who still finds it all a little absurd, a little magical, and entirely hers. There's something rebellious in her steadiness, in the refusal to let tragedy, nostalgia, or the slow crawl of time rewrite the truth of what it was like. But if Nancy's career was defined by sharp scripts and grounded realism, the next actress lived in a more exaggerated register: Technicolor, opera, betrayal, and she wore it all like a gown tailored to chaos. 8. Anne Blythe. Anne Blythe didn't just act in melodrama, she practically distilled it. In Mildred Pierce, she delivered one of the most cold-blooded daughter performances in cinema history, complete with champagne, slaps, and venom laced into every smile. She was 16 when she filmed it. 16. And she held the screen against Joan Crawford like a woman born with a vendetta. But Blythe wasn't just a villain. She sang, she danced, she played saints and sirens, tragic heroines, and musical ingenues. MGM never quite figured out what to do with that range. So they did what studios did best. They tried everything, all at once. The result was a career shaped like a kaleidoscope, dazzling, fragmented, and impossible to pin down. Born in 1928, she's now 97. Still included in retrospectives as one of the last women who could belt a tune in the morning and sob on cue by afternoon. Her performances may feel like time capsules now, steeped in the grand, operatic gestures of another age. But her survival is anything but outdated. It's sharp. It's deliberate. It's a quiet correction to the assumption that old glamour burns out fast. And maybe that's the real twist. Blythe's career was full of betrayal and reversals on screen. But off-screen, she seems to have chosen stability, longevity, faith. Even in her chaos, there was control. And speaking of reinvention, our next actress did something truly scandalous for a Hollywood starlet. She found God, got out, and never looked back. 9. Colleen Townsend. Colleen Townsend was on the brink. The studio contracts were signed, the magazine spreads were printed, the name was being whispered in all the right lunch meetings. She had the look, wide-eyed, porcelain, the perfect blend of post-war optimism and pin-up photogenic. 20th Century Fox had her pegged as the next big thing, and for a brief window in the late 1940s, she played along. Films like Janie Gets Married and The Walls of Jericho put her on the map, though never quite at the center of it. And then, she did something that almost no one in her position would have dared. She stopped. Not stalled. Stopped. Cold. At the height of her visibility, Colleen Townsend walked away from stardom to pursue a life of faith, theology, and public service. She married a seminary student, became Colleen Townsend Evans, and transformed herself from rising ingenue into a diplomat of conscience. What makes her remarkable isn't just that she left Hollywood, but that she didn't come back. No forgotten star comeback tours, no teary tell-alls, no reruns on late-night couch interviews. She simply rebuilt her life, brick by intentional brick, into something unrecognizable to the publicity machine that once tried to define her. And in 2025, she's still here, 97 years old, serene, and so far removed from Hollywood drama that her story almost feels like a fable. But not all Golden Age exits were peaceful. Some actresses didn't leave the business. They let it mutate around them. And the next woman on this list made sure she got the last word, on her own terms, and in her own spotlight. 10. Terry Moore. Terry Moore may have started as a wide-eyed teen in the 1940s, but don't let the ingenue label fool you. She was a fighter. Her breakout role in Comeback, Little Sheba, earned her an Oscar nomination, but she didn't ride that success into quiet retirement. She grabbed it like a lever and used it to pry open doors for the next 50 years. Terry didn't fade. She evolved. Born in 1929 and still walking red carpets in her mid-90s, Moore has the kind of career that reads like a studio backlog. Westerns, teen dramas, sci-fi oddities. Even a stint as the leading lady in Mighty Joe Young, where she played opposite a 12-foot gorilla puppet and made it look emotionally plausible. She's a walking contradiction. Someone who danced in the margins of serious drama and campy spectacle, but never seemed out of place in either. And then there's the part Hollywood never knew what to do with. Her claim that she was secretly married to reclusive billionaire Howard Hughes. For decades, Moore maintained that their marriage was real and unannulled, giving her a strange kind of retroactive stardom as the last surviving witness to one of cinema's most mythic, eccentric moguls. Whether or not it was true hardly matters now. What matters is that Terry Moore, at 96, still has people asking. She's not just alive, she's unresolved. And that's the rarest trick of all. Which brings us to someone who danced through fairy tales and never really stopped, not even at 96, and not even when the spotlight turned off. 11. Margaret Carey. If you've ever watched Peter Pan and felt something inexplicably human behind the flitting sparkle of Tinkerbell, that's Margaret Carey, the woman who was Tinkerbell before animation ever filled her in. At 96, she's not just a performer, she's a living special effect. And unlike most Hollywood icons, you may not recognize her face, but her movements have been seen by billions. Born in 1929, Margaret Carey began as a child actress and dancer in the 1930s, long before the pixie dust. She appeared in shorts, B-movies, and live TV, always hustling, always adapting. But it was her work as the live-action model for Disney's Tinkerbell in the early 50s that made her an invisible legend. Her job? To mime every moment. The jealousy, the fury, the flirtation. So animators could trace her movements into cinematic myth. That kind of contribution doesn't get Oscars. It gets forgotten. Except Margaret never let herself be forgotten. She's been touring, speaking, and signing autographs into her 90s, tap dancing through fan conventions like a time traveler who missed the memo about slowing down. There's something oddly fitting about it. A woman who played an unvoiced, animated sprite now telling her story loud and clear, decades later. Her legacy isn't just in frames. It's in the gesture of reclaiming visibility. And she's not the only one who's refused to be quietly shelved. The next actress is royalty in every sense, crowned by both Hollywood and Italy, and still commanding rooms with nothing more than a glance and a history longer than most nations' film catalogs. 12. Sophia Loren. Sophia Loren doesn't walk. She arrives. Even now in her 90s, her presence bends rooms. There's a regal inertia to her, like gravity forgot to act normally around her. Born in 1934, she came from the rubble of post-war Naples and ascended to international stardom with a smirk, a hip tilt, and the kind of screen presence that made entire nations pause. She was more than just a face. She was an empire. Houseboat, Two Women, El Cid. Films that let her rage, grieve, seduce, and scheme, often all within the same shot. Unlike many actresses of her era, Loren didn't play American. She brought Italy with her, unapologetic, operatic, volcanic, and somehow made global audiences adjust to her. There's a reason she's still with us in 2025, having celebrated her 90th birthday to standing ovations and retrospectives that could barely scratch the surface. Loren didn't just survive Hollywood, she outgrew it. She aged without apology, acted without compromise, and wielded her mythos like a silk glove hiding a steel gauntlet. And yet, her secret weapon has always been her intelligence. She knew exactly when to vanish, when to return, and how to keep the mystique intact. The world changed. She didn't beg it to follow. And now it circles back to her, full of reverence. But if Loren is the queen of continental cool, the next woman on our list was Ice and Fire in Hitchcock's Playground. A blonde mystery wrapped in feathers and fury, still alive and pecking at convention. 13. Tippi Hedren. If ever a star was born from chaos, it was Tippi Hedren. She didn't just enter Hollywood, she was flung into its most terrifying fever dream. Plucked from a diet soda commercial by Alfred Hitchcock himself, Hedren became the immaculate blonde centerpiece of The Birds and Marnie, cold, enigmatic, and exquisitely under siege. The camera adored her. The director? A little too much. But Hedren wasn't just a pretty cipher in tailored suits. Beneath the ice was someone startlingly tough. She didn't break when Hitchcock tried to control her. She didn't fold when the industry cooled. Instead, she took a hard left turn into animal rescue, conservation, and the kind of activism that most retired stars would never dare touch. While other Golden Age actresses posed for legacy tributes, Tippi was founding the Shambhala Preserve, caring for lions and tigers like a matriarch of the jungle. By 2025, she's 95 and still radiating the kind of energy that makes you sit up straighter. Her beauty is undiminished, but it's her resilience that really stings. In every interview, every rare appearance, there's the sense that Hedren outlasted not just her era, but the systems that tried to define her. She didn't play the victim. She made survival look like strategy. And somehow, her bloodline didn't stop with her. Her daughter, Melanie Griffith, and granddaughter, Dakota Johnson, have continued the dynasty. But the origin spark, the real enigma, is still Tippy. And speaking of Hitchcock heroines, the next one didn't just run from danger. She walked into it with spine-straight defiance, bringing quiet thunder to roles that still haunt the screen. 14. Vera Miles. Vera Miles never screamed. Not the way the genre demanded. Not even in Psycho, where the screams echoed through showers and motel corridors. That was Janet Leigh's job. Vera? Vera was the one who looked, who followed, who knocked on doors and pulled back curtains, not with terror, but with suspicion. Born in 1930, Vera Miles was the kind of actress who made directors nervous. Hitchcock saw something in her, that fine line between elegance and danger, and cast her as the successor to Grace Kelly. But the fairy tale never quite materialized. Life got in the way, roles fell through, reputations frayed, she became a muse interrupted. But even in the detours, Miles left fingerprints. The Searchers, The Wrong Man, and of course Psycho, where her steady, suspicious presence grounded the film's spiraling dread. She didn't play for hysteria, she played for truth. Tight-lipped, morally upright, and quietly rattling. In 2025, she's 95 and living far from the flickering lights. There are no memoir tours, no viral retrospectives. Vera Miles simply is. A monument to restraint. A reminder that not every legacy needs to shout to be heard. And maybe that's what makes her even more mysterious. She survived the decades without playing into them. But the next name? Oh, the next name sings, dances, speaks every language of survival. And she's not just still alive, she's still winning. 15. Rita Moreno. Rita Moreno didn't just break barriers. She danced over them, heels first, while hitting her mark and landing a punchline. Born in 1931 and still stealing scenes in 2025, she's the kind of legend who doesn't just have a legacy. She performs it. Moreno didn't wait to be let in by Hollywood's narrow standards. She kicked the door off the hinges, then asked if they wanted that in Spanish or English. Her resume reads like a genre-defying victory lap. Singin' in the Rain, The King and I, West Side Story, Oz, One Day at a Time, sitcoms, Shakespeare, stage, screen. If there was a medium, she mastered it. If there was a ceiling, she broke it. And let's not forget the hardware, an Emmy, a Grammy, an Oscar, and a Tony. The full EGOT set, long before award culture turned the acronym into a hashtag. But it wasn't easy. Typecasting, discrimination, years of being exoticized, then erased. Moreno powered through it not with quiet grace, but with grit and a grin that dared you to underestimate her. She was never a footnote. She was the main clause. And now, at 94, she's still doing interviews, still dazzling in public appearances, still reminding people that golden age doesn't mean gone. But while Moreno turned the stage into her battlefield, the next actress weaponized silence, using stillness, subtlety, and one unforgettable performance to haunt the American conscience from the inside out. 16. Carol Baker. Carol Baker never raised her voice. She didn't have to. When she starred in Baby Doll in 1956, audiences squirmed, not because she screamed, but because she didn't. Her performance was a masterclass in ambiguity, unsettling innocence, and southern decay, all wrapped in a lacy nightgown and a cloud of cigarette smoke. It was the role that made her, and the role that nearly unmade her. Born in 1931, Baker became a controversial icon almost overnight. Not for scandal off-screen, but for what she represented on-screen. A woman you couldn't quite categorize. Not victim, not seductress. Something stranger. Something American. She followed Baby Doll with a string of major titles. Giant, The Big Country, How the West Was Won. But Hollywood, ever allergic to women who didn't fit clean boxes, began to look elsewhere. So Baker did something radical. She left. First to Europe, where she reinvented herself in giallo thrillers and cult films. Then eventually, she stepped back altogether. Yet in 2025, she's still here, alive, clear-eyed, her legacy intact but never fully decoded. Carol Baker didn't play Hollywood's game. She played its glitch. And that's what makes her unforgettable. Not the fame, but the friction. And speaking of women who never played by the rules, our next icon started with cowboys, outshone them all, and walked away with the camera and the cool firmly in her pocket. 17. Angie Dickinson. Angie Dickinson didn't enter Hollywood. She strolled in, eyes sharp, timing sharper, and by the time the men around her figured out they were being outclassed, it was already too late. She started with cowboys in Rio Bravo, slick operators in Ocean's 11, and every kind of noir-drenched male lead in between. But Dickinson wasn't just the woman beside the plot. She was the plot. And by the 1970s, she'd flipped the script entirely. Born in 1931, she was part of the wave that arrived just as the golden age was cracking. That strange twilight zone where old-school glamour was colliding with a new kind of danger. Dickinson thrived there. Her portrayal of Sergeant Pepper Anderson in Policewoman wasn't just groundbreaking. It was cultural dynamite. She played it with guts, glam, and a wry smile that said she knew exactly how many rules she was breaking just by showing up in uniform. And yet, she never clung to the image. Dickinson aged without apology, retired without bitterness, and made peace with a business that rarely offers it. In 2025, she's 94 and still very much a presence. Not loud, not nostalgic, just present. Which somehow feels more rebellious than ever. She didn't fade. She eased into the shadows like someone who knew she could step back into the light at any moment. And while Dickinson carved a place in the American crime drama, the next actress slipped into something a little more metaphysical, drifting through roles that blurred fantasy, memory, and meaning, all while never truly leaving the stage. 18. Shirley MacLaine. Shirley MacLaine doesn't play characters. She embodies echoes. Watching her in the Apartment or Terms of Endearment feels less like performance and more like eavesdropping on a soul you forgot you used to be. Born in 1934, MacLaine never fit comfortably in Hollywood's typewriter-era archetypes. Too sharp for ingenues, too odd for glamour queens, too intuitive for the roles they offered, so she rewrote the mold. Her early roles made her famous. Her mid-career ones made her timeless. But what makes Shirley MacLaine a mystery even in 2025 is that she never stopped asking the questions out loud. Why are we here? Where do we go? What happens after the curtain falls? While most of her peers settled for memoirs and biopics, MacLaine was busy publishing bestsellers about reincarnation, cosmic destiny, and past lives, all while continuing to act, win awards, and show up at events looking like someone who knows she's already lived through 5 different lifetimes. And maybe she has. In 2025, at 91, she's still turning heads. Sometimes with a quip, sometimes with a theory, and often with that knowing smile that says, "You're not ready for the full story yet." She's both star and spectator in her own myth. And if you think her version of Hollywood was surreal, the next woman on our list took the Dream Factory's most epic fantasies and turned them into something beautifully, hauntingly real. 19. Deborah Paget. Deborah Paget had a face made for epics, the kind of delicate, luminous beauty that directors loved to cast beneath pyramids, palaces, or stormy desert skies. She was Hollywood's go-to for exotic, a word that aged like milk. And yet, somehow, she brought a kind of grace to roles that were often written as mere set dressing. The 10 Commandments, Broken Arrow, Love Me Tender. Films that traded on spectacle, but found something real in her eyes. Born in 1933, Paget started young and rose fast. By the time she was 23, She'd been a pharaoh's wife, a Native American princess, and Elvis Presley's first leading lady. She had the poise of an empress and the vulnerability of a lost girl, and she made both feel truthful, even when the scripts didn't. And then she vanished. Not into tragedy or scandal, but into faith. She walked away from the camera, turned toward religion, and left behind an image frozen in cinematic amber, forever youthful, forever in motion, yet no longer playing the game. In 2025, at 92, she lives far from the soundstage, but not from the story. Paget exists like a question half-asked. What happens when the muse decides she's done? What lingers in the films when the actress leaves first? And while Deborah's story is one of quiet departure, the next woman's journey began even earlier. A child star who didn't just survive the system, but came out the other side holding her own spotlight. Still bright, still here, still shining. 20. Margaret O'Brien. Margaret O'Brien didn't grow into fame. She was handed it like a prop and told to cry on cue. And she did, effortlessly, devastatingly. By the time she was 7, she could outact adults twice her age and break your heart without raising her voice. In Meet Me in St. Louis, she wasn't just a supporting character. She was the pulse of the film, the emotional anchor in a Technicolor memory. Born in 1937, O'Brien was one of MGM's crown jewels, a child star molded by the machine, but never consumed by it. She wept on schedule, smiled on command, and collected awards before she knew what they meant. But unlike so many child actors, she didn't unravel when the cameras moved on. Instead, she recalibrated, quietly, patiently, with the poise of someone who'd already seen the full cycle of stardom before hitting puberty. Over the years, she appeared sporadically, television roles, interviews, retrospectives, always gracious, always grounded. In 2025, at 88, she's still seen as one of the few child stars who didn't just survive. She aged with grace. Not a cautionary tale, but a living lesson. Her life reads like a perfectly structured arc, except there's still no final act. And just when you think the tale can't twist again, the next actress arrives from the snowy banks of Bedford Falls, ready to remind us that even the smallest roles can echo across generations. 21. Carol Coombs. Carol Coombs didn't need a marquee role to become immortal. All it took was one line, a moment of screen time, and a Christmas tree in the corner. In It's a Wonderful Life, she played Janie Bailey, George's piano-playing daughter, a seemingly minor character in a film that turned out to be the emotional architecture of American cinema. She didn't carry the plot. She carried the feeling. Born in 1935, Coombs acted in a handful of films throughout the 1940s and early 50s, usually playing sweet-faced girls with ribbons in their hair and good manners on their breath. But her legacy was sealed with that one holiday classic, the kind of film that plays on loop every December like a shared national dream. And for Carol Coombs, that meant she never really left the screen. Not entirely. She eventually stepped away from acting, pursued a quiet life as a teacher, and embraced the cult glow of her one iconic role with modesty and charm. In 2025, at 90, she still occasionally surfaces in interviews and fan gatherings, offering glimpses into what it felt like to be part of something that got bigger every year, even as she herself got further from it. And while her story is small, it's stubborn, proof that sometimes one scene can last longer than a career. But the next actress? She moved through Hollywood with even less fanfare, a teenage voice in a strange little sci-fi film that would somehow outlive its own budget, and then some. 22. Dawn Bender. Dawn Bender was never supposed to last in Hollywood, at least not on paper. She was a teenage actress, mostly radio-trained, who dipped in and out of film sets like someone trying on borrowed shoes. She never chased fame, never needed it. But fate, or maybe fate's weirder little cousin, cult cinema, had other plans. Born in 1935, Bender's early career was modest. Small roles in period dramas, background in a few MGM productions. And then came Teenagers from Outer Space, a 1959 ultra-low-budget sci-fi oddity where alien invaders and stiff dialogue collide in glorious black and white. Bender played Betty, the female lead, and by all logic, that should have been the end of the story. But cult films don't operate on logic. Over time, Teenagers from Outer Space became a midnight movie staple, riffed on, celebrated, dissected, and Bender became its ghostly anchor. She'd left acting behind, raised a family, moved into teaching, but her image, locked in celluloid camp, just kept beaming into the void. In 2025, at 90, she remains one of those beautiful Hollywood contradictions, forgotten by fame, yet immortal in fragments. Not a star, but a satellite, always orbiting. And she's not the only one, because the next actress on our list started in England, charmed America, and somehow stayed just enough under the radar to still feel like a hidden gem. 23. Lisa Davis. Lisa Davis had one of those voices, lilting, clever, unmistakably British, that made her sound older than she looked, wiser than the scripts allowed. Born in 1936 in London, she slipped into Hollywood during the 1950s, where the demand for refined accents was high, even if the opportunities weren't always generous. Still, Davis carved out a niche, the cultured ingenue, the smart sister, the sidekick who understood more than she said. You might remember her from Queen of Outer Space, or from television appearances on shows like The George Burns and Gracie Allen Show. But chances are, if you know her at all, it's from 101 Dalmatians. No, not on screen. Behind it. Davis voiced Anita, the calm, elegant counterpart to Pongo's Roger, and gave the animated film its quiet, adult grace. And like many voice actors of the era, she disappeared behind her own performance. Unlike her sister, Betty Davis, yes, that Betty Davis, Lisa never sought the heat of the spotlight. She acted, married, stepped back, and let the industry move on without her. But the recordings never went away. The elegance lingered. In 2025, at 89, she's still alive, still credited, still occasionally rediscovered by Disney fans who look up the voice behind Anita and find more than they expected. A subtle, skilled actress who never demanded attention, but earned it anyway. And just when you think we're done with fairy tales, the next name traded her crown for a veil. Hollywood royalty turned abbess, in a plot twist no studio could have written. 24. Dolores Hart. Dolores Hart kissed Elvis. Twice. On screen. In Technicolor. And then she left it all behind for God. That sentence alone could have been a pitch meeting in 1958, but it was her real life. Hart began her career with all the classic makings of a starlet: beauty, talent, and a studio-engineered buzz. She made her debut alongside Presley in Loving You, returned in King Creole, and by her early 20s, she was considered one of MGM's most promising leading ladies. But Hart was after something else. In 1963, at the height of her fame, she stunned Hollywood by retiring from acting and entering a Benedictine monastery. She became Mother Dolores Hart, and for the next 6 decades, she would serve not in sound stages or theaters, but in silence, reflection, and spiritual leadership. It's the kind of twist that sounds like myth, but it's all true, and documented with reverence in everything from interviews to an Oscar-nominated short film about her later life. Now, in 2025, at 87, she still lives within the Abbey walls in Connecticut, occasionally emerging to give thoughtful, measured reflections on her former life. She doesn't reject her past, she simply reframes it. She may have left the screen, but she never left the story. And fittingly, our next actress began in stories, as a child, as a prodigy, and still wears the glow of Hollywood's golden hour like it never really ended. 25. Gigi Perreault. Gigi Perreault wasn't just a child star. She was a phenomenon in satin shoes and perfect diction. Born in 1941, she was acting before she could fully read, landing roles alongside Greer Garson, Claude Rains, and Joseph Cotten by the time most kids were still figuring out hopscotch. There was something luminous about her. Not flashy, not forced. Just luminous. Studios couldn't get enough. In films like Madame Curie, Mr. Skeffington, and Shadow on the Wall, she projected not just innocence, but intelligence. That rare quality child actors either fake poorly or embody fully. Perot embodied it. Her characters were never just cute. They were sharp, wounded, observant. She could cry convincingly at 5 and hold a scene with a seasoned Oscar winner by 7. And then, as with most child actors, the landscape shifted. But Perot didn't crash. She transitioned, gracefully, into teen roles, then into stage and television, and eventually into advocacy. She taught, mentored, and gave back to the industry that had never quite figured out how to handle girls who grew up too gracefully. In 2025, she's 84, still active in the preservation of film history, and still striking in her presence. Her fame may have dimmed, but the warmth of her legacy remains. A golden child who didn't burn out, just grew up. And with her, our list completes its final bow. A curtain call not just for those who lived through the golden age, but for those still living with it. Holding it. Reminding us that time forgets many, but not all. And some stars, just a few, are stubborn enough to outshine even the endings.